She was 7 years old, standing alone on a frozen Chicago street at 6:47 in the morning. And she was about to do something that would either save her life or end it. Charlene Phillips watched the most dangerous man in the city step out of his restaurant.
Eustorgiu Marcelo.
Ice blue eyes, neck tattoos barely hidden by an expensive geometric scarf. Silver chains catching the streetlight like warnings. 2 bodyguards flanked him, hands resting near their jackets where everyone knew guns waited. Every person on that street crossed to the other side when they saw him coming. Shop owners looked down. Even the gang members on the corner went silent. But this little girl in a too thin pink jacket with a broken backpack strap didn't run. She stepped directly into his path. The bodyguards' hands moved to their weapons. The street froze, and Charlene looked up at this monster and asked a question that would destroy a child trafficking network operating inside Chicago's foster care system. "Mister, will you walk me to school? I'm scared to go alone." What happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it, because the man who'd built an empire on fear made a choice that would cost him everything. He said yes, but Charlene wasn't asking for protection from street gangs. She was running from something far worse. Corrupt social workers with fake credentials. Officials who sold children like merchandise. A trafficking ring that had been operating in plain sight for 5 years, protected by judges, police officers, and people society trusted most. And the moment Eustorgio agreed to protect her, he became their next target. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to witness will leave you speechless. Eustorgio Marcelo wasn't supposed to care about anyone. That's how you survived in his world. Build walls. Trust no one. Show mercy to nobody. He'd learned that lesson 15 years ago when his 11-year-old sister Elena vanished walking home from school. Taken by traffickers, sold and moved so many times her trail went completely cold. That loss destroyed his family. His mother stopped eating, died of grief 2 years later. His father drowned himself in the Chicago River rather than live with the not knowing. Eustorgio entered the criminal world not for money, but for one thing: access to information ordinary families could never obtain. He built an empire on a single promise. He would never turn away from a child in danger. Never let what happened to Elena happen to another innocent. But he'd never expected that promise to be tested by a 7-year-old girl with desperate eyes standing outside his restaurant on a freezing November morning. Charlene had no mother, no father, no family left who cared if she made it to school alive. The foster system had failed her 4 times. Group homes couldn't protect her. And now someone was hunting her. Someone organized. Someone patient. Someone who moved children like inventory and had the credentials to make it all look legal. She'd watched Eustorgio for 3 weeks. Noticed how dangerous men went silent when he walked past. Seen the fear in their eyes. And she'd made a calculation that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to make. If the bad men were terrified of him, maybe he was the only one strong enough to keep her safe. She had no idea that asking him for help would expose a trafficking network reaching into social services, family courts, and police departments. Had no idea that corrupt officials had already marked her file. No family, no connections, perfect acquisition target. Had no idea that the nice social worker visiting her school was actually Rebecca Walsh, a woman with falsified credentials working for Victor Castellanos, Chicago's most dangerous child trafficker. All Charlene knew was that she needed protection. Real protection. The kind that made monsters back away before they got close. So she stepped into Eustorgio Marcelo's path. And when she asked him to walk her to school, she unknowingly started a war that would either save her life or destroy them both. What Eustorgio did next. You need to see it to believe it. Have you ever trusted someone you had no reason to trust, simply because your instincts told you they were the only one who could save you? Tony, the lead bodyguard, opened his mouth to protest, but Eustorgio raised one hand. The gesture was subtle, barely more than a finger lift, but it carried absolute authority. Tony's mouth closed. The sedan's engine continued its low hum, waiting. "Lead the way," Eustorgio said to Charlene. She blinked, as if she couldn't quite believe he'd agreed. Then she turned and started walking. Her small legs moved quickly, trying to match the pace of a man who controlled half of Chicago. Eustorgio slowed his usual stride. Behind them, Tony and Marco followed at a careful distance, their hands still hovering near their weapons, their eyes scanning every doorway and shadow. The first 2 blocks were quiet. Residential buildings with barred windows and graffiti that marked territory lines Eustorgio knew by heart. His organization controlled 3 of the 4 corners in this neighborhood. The 4th belonged to the Southside Disciples, a gang that knew better than to cause problems on streets Eustorgio considered protected. But as they walked further, the landscape changed. Abandoned buildings loomed like broken teeth, their windows shattered, their doorways dark. Charlene's pace quickened past these structures, her shoulders hunching forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. Eustorgio noticed movement in one of the doorways. A figure, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, watching them pass. Watching Charlene specifically. His jaw tightened. "You walk this route every day?" he asked. Charlene nodded without looking up. "It's the fastest way." "Fastest doesn't mean safest." "Nothing's safe," she said simply. "Just faster or slower." The wisdom in those words coming from a 7-year-old made something twist in Eustorgio's chest. This child had learned lessons she should never have needed to know. They reached the corner of 5th and Ashland. 4 teenagers in red bandanas stood outside a convenience store, passing a cigarette between them. Eustorgio recognized the colors immediately. Red Serpents, a gang that specialized in recruiting children, promising protection and family while delivering addiction and violence. The teenagers spotted Charlene and began moving toward her, their usual routine. But then they saw Eustorgio, saw the silver chains, the tattoos climbing his neck, the ice-blue eyes that had witnessed more violence than they could imagine, saw Tony and Marco flanking him like attack dogs on invisible leashes. The teenagers froze. One of them, the oldest, muttered something and they all retreated back to the storefront, suddenly very interested in their phones. "They talk to you?" Eustorgio asked quietly. "Every day," Charlene whispered. "They say they'll keep me safe, that I should walk with them instead of alone." "And what do you say?" "Nothing. I just run." They passed an alley between 2 brick buildings. Eustorgio's trained eye caught the details Charlene probably didn't understand but had learned to fear. Used needles scattered on the pavement. A shopping cart piled with someone's entire life. And in the deeper shadows, movement. Always movement. Predators who hunted in darkness because daylight exposed what they really were. Charlene walked faster past the alley. Her hand unconsciously reached for Eustorgio's jacket, grabbing a handful of expensive fabric like it was a lifeline. She released it quickly, embarrassed, but the gesture revealed everything. This child had been navigating a war zone alone. Every single morning. 14 blocks of danger that would make grown men nervous. And she was 7 years old. By the time they reached Carver Elementary, Eustorgio had counted 17 separate threats. 17 moments where Charlene's small body moving alone through these streets could have been noticed, followed, taken. The protective fury building in his chest had transformed into something colder, more calculated, more dangerous. This couldn't happen again. The next morning, Charlene was waiting. Same spot on the sidewalk, same pink jacket, same broken backpack strap. When Eustorgio emerged from his restaurant at 6:50, she looked up at him with those wide brown eyes and said nothing, just fell into step beside him when he nodded. Tony pulled him aside after the second walk. "Boss, this is becoming a pattern. Patterns make you predictable. Predictable gets people killed." Eustorgio understood the concern. Routine was dangerous in his line of work. But he also understood something Tony didn't. This child had chosen him. In a world where she'd been failed by every system designed to protect her, she'd looked at the most dangerous man in Chicago and decided he was safer than anyone else. He couldn't walk away from that. By the fourth morning, Charlene started talking. Small things at first, observations about the neighborhood, questions about the buildings they passed. Then deeper truths began spilling out in fragments, like she'd been holding them so long they needed somewhere to land. Her mother had died when Charlene was 5. Medicine that wasn't medicine was how she described it. Eustorgio understood. Overdose, the epidemic that killed more people in his city than all the gang violence combined. Did you have other family? He asked. My grandma tried, but she got too sick. They put me in a foster home after that. Just one. Charlene shook her head. 4. The first one had too many kids. Couldn't remember all our names. The second one, the dad looked at me wrong. I told my social worker, but nobody believed me. Her voice went quiet. The third one was okay until the money stopped coming. Then they said I had to go back. And the fourth? She didn't answer immediately. They walked half a block in silence before she spoke again. Something felt wrong there. I can't explain it. Just wrong. Like the way people smiled but their eyes didn't smile. Like they were waiting for something. So I ran. Eustorgio's hands clenched inside his coat pockets. He knew exactly what she meant. He'd seen that look in the eyes of human traffickers, predators who wore masks of respectability while hunting the vulnerable. You were smart to trust your instincts, he said. That's what got me in the group home. Mrs. Patterson says I'm difficult, that I have trust issues. Mrs. Patterson is wrong. You have survival instincts. That's different. Charlene looked up at him, studying his face like she was trying to understand if he meant it. Eustorgio stopped walking. He knelt down to her eye level, right there on the sidewalk at the corner of 5th and Ashland. Charlene, listen to me. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. Your body knows danger before your brain can name it. Don't let anyone tell you that's a problem. That's what keeps you alive. She nodded slowly. Is that how you know things? Like yesterday when you made us cross the street before we got to that alley. Exactly like that. I saw 2 men standing in positions that gave them too much visibility of the sidewalk. Their body language was wrong. So we avoided them. Can you teach me that? How to see what you see? Eustorgio stood up and continued walking. Already started. Noticed that car parked on the corner ahead. Charlene looked. The gray one. Engines running. You can see the exhaust. But nobody's inside. That's a problem. Why? Because someone left it running for a reason. Either they're coming back fast, or they're watching from somewhere nearby. They crossed to the opposite sidewalk. Charlene glanced back at the car, processing the lesson. By the time they reached her school that morning, she'd identified 3 more potential threats on her own. Eustorgio felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not quite pride, but close. This child was learning to protect herself. And somehow, teaching her was teaching him something he'd forgotten. That protection could be more than violence. Could be preparation. Could be trust. The black sedan appeared on the 3rd day of their walks. Eustorgio noticed it immediately. Parked 2 blocks from the restaurant, engine idling, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. He cataloged the details automatically. Late model Chrysler, clean despite the dirty streets. License plate position just slightly wrong, like someone had removed and reattached it recently. By the 5th day, the sedan had moved positions but remained present. Always 2 or 3 blocks away, always with a clear sight line to Charlene. Never close enough to seem threatening to anyone who wasn't trained to spot surveillance patterns. Eustorgio was very trained. On the 6th morning, he pulled Marco aside after dropping Charlene at school. Black Chrysler sedan, tinted windows, has been following our route. I want to know who's driving it, who owns it, and why they're interested in a 7-year-old girl. Marco's expression darkened. You think it's connected to her? I think someone's watching her specifically. The car doesn't appear until we're within 2 blocks of the group home. It disappears after we reach the school. That's not random. I'll handle it, Marco said. That evening, Eustorgio did something he'd been avoiding. He went to see where Charlene lived. The lakeside group home for children occupied a 3-story building that had seen better decades. Peeling paint exposed rotted wood beneath. The front steps sagged in the middle. A chain-link fence surrounded a concrete yard where weeds pushed through cracks, claiming territory no one else wanted. Inside, the smell hit him first. Industrial cleaner trying to mask something deeper, something that spoke of too many people in too little space with not enough resources to maintain either dignity or safety. A tired-looking woman at the front desk directed him to Mrs. Patterson's office. The director was in her 50s. Gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She stood when Eustorgio entered, her smile professional but her eyes wary. "Mr. Marcello, I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to discuss Charlene Phillips." Something flickered across Mrs. Patterson's face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "Is there a problem?" "That's what I'm here to determine. How long has Charlene been in your care?" 6 weeks. She came to us from a foster placement that didn't work out. "And her safety here? You're confident she's protected?" Mrs. Patterson's hands fidgeted with papers on her desk. "We do our best with limited resources. Our security measures meet state requirements." "That's not what I asked." The silence stretched. Mrs. Patterson sat down slowly. "Mr. Marcello, I'm sure you're aware that showing this level of interest in a child who isn't related to you raises certain questions. I'm aware that someone's been following her. Black sedan, tinted windows. You've seen it." Her face went pale. "I don't monitor vehicles in the neighborhood." "You should." "Who's been asking about Charlene recently? Social workers? Case managers? Anyone unusual?" "There's been a new social worker assigned to her case. Ms. Walsh. She's been very thorough, very interested in Charlene's well-being." "When did this social worker start coming around?" "About 3 weeks ago." Eustorgio's blood went cold. 3 weeks. Right around the time Charlene first approached him for protection. "This Ms. Walsh, she comes during scheduled hours?" "Sometimes. Other times she stops by unannounced. She says she wants to observe Charlene in her natural environment." Mrs. Patterson's voice carried uncertainty. "She's been very insistent about arranging private evaluations. Says Charlene might qualify for specialized placement services." "And you've verified her credentials?" Mrs. Patterson's silence answered everything. Eustorgio stood. "If Ms. Walsh comes back, you call me immediately. Don't let her take Charlene anywhere." He placed his card on the desk. "And Mrs. Patterson? Upgrade your security. Tonight." He left before she could respond. Outside, Marco was waiting by the car. "Boss, you need to see this." Marco held up his phone, showing a photograph of the black sedan. "Registered to a shell company. Same company that owns 3 other vehicles, all used in surveillance operations. This isn't random, and it's not small time." Eustorgio stared at the photo. Someone was hunting Charlene. Someone organized, patient, professional. And they just made the worst mistake of their lives by doing it on his watch. During their morning walk, Charlene mentioned it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "The nice social worker came to my school again yesterday." Eustorgio's pace didn't change, but every nerve in his body went on alert. "Which social worker?" "Ms. Walsh. She's been coming for a few weeks now. She always brings candy and asks me lots of questions." "What kind of questions?" Charlene shrugged, adjusting her backpack. "About where I go after school. If anyone picks me up. If I have friends who walk with me." She paused. "Yesterday she asked if I wanted to leave early for a special evaluation. Said it would help me get placed in a better home." Eustorgio stopped walking. "Did you go with her?"
No.
Something felt wrong. Like what you taught me about trusting my instincts. Charlene looked up at him. Her smile was too big. Like she was trying too hard to make me think she was nice. "Describe her." Maybe 30-something? She wears really expensive clothes. like designer stuff. Her teeth are super white, like movie star white. And she has blonde hair that looks perfect, like she just came from a salon. Everything Charlene described screamed wrong. Social workers in Chicago's overloaded foster system didn't wear designer clothes or maintain salon hair. They wore Target clearance and exhaustion. This Ms. Walsh. She comes during school hours? Usually at lunch. She talks to the principal first, then they call me to the office. Yesterday she said next time we should go somewhere private to talk. She said the school was too noisy for proper evaluation. Eustorgio pulled out his phone and called Marco. I need you to pull Charlene Phillips's case file. Find out who her assigned social worker is. Now. He waited, watching Charlene kick at a pebble on the sidewalk, oblivious to the danger she'd just revealed. Marco's voice came back through the phone. Her caseworker is Connor McCauley. Male, been with the department for 12 years. No female social workers assigned to her case. Eustorgio's jaw clenched. Send Tony to Carver Elementary. I want him watching the school. If a blonde woman in expensive clothes shows up, I want photos, license plate, everything. After dropping Charlene at school, Eustorgio made sure Tony was positioned across the street with a clear view of the entrance. Then he went back to his restaurant and waited. The call came at 1:47 p.m. Boss, she's here. Tony's voice was tight. Blonde, designer clothes, talking to a man in the parking lot. They're arguing about something. Get photos of both of them. Run facial recognition immediately. 20 minutes later, Eustorgio was staring at 2 photographs on his laptop screen. The woman's image came back first. Rebecca Walsh, former social worker, credentials revoked 3 years ago for falsifying adoption records in cases that later led to a federal investigation into child trafficking. The investigation had stalled. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. The man's image took longer to process, but when the results appeared, Eustorgio's blood turned to ice. Victor Castellanos. The name existed in Eustorgio's extensive files on Chicago's criminal underground. Not drugs, not weapons, not the usual territorial disputes that occasionally required his intervention. Castellanos specialized in something darker. Children. He moved them through a network of corrupt officials, fake adoptions, and offshore buyers who paid premium prices for young, undocumented merchandise. Eustorgio had heard whispers about Castellanos for years, but never had reason to involve himself. The man operated in shadows even other criminals avoided, protected by connections that reached into law enforcement, social services, and family courts. But now Castellanos had made a critical mistake. He'd targeted a child under Eustorgio's protection. Eustorgio pulled up Marco's number. Find everything on Victor Castellanos. Properties, associates, bank accounts, every place he conducts business. And Marco? Do it quietly. I don't want him knowing we're looking. How far do you want me to go with this, boss? Eustorgio looked at the photo of Rebecca Walsh standing outside Charlene's school, her too white smile captured in perfect detail. As far as it takes. The office was dark except for the desk lamp casting long shadows across 15-year-old newspaper clippings spread across polished mahogany. Eustorgio sat alone at 2 a.m., a glass of whiskey untouched beside his hand, staring at a photograph he kept locked in his bottom drawer. Elena Marcello, age 11. Dark curls pulled into pigtails, gap-toothed smile, holding a science fair trophy she'd won 3 days before she vanished. His baby sister. The question Marco had almost asked earlier hung in the air like smoke. Why risk everything for one girl? Why expose himself, create patterns, make enemies of people who operated in shadows even criminals feared? The answer sat in that photograph, frozen in time, forever 11 years old. It happened on a Tuesday. Elena had stayed late at school for chess club. Their mother had called Eustorgio, who was 19 and thought he was invincible, asking him to pick her up. But he'd been too busy, too involved in proving himself to the neighborhood guys who ran card games and moved product. Too important to walk his little sister home. She can walk herself, he'd said. She's not a baby. Elena never made it home. The 3-block walk from school to their apartment might as well have been 3,000 miles. The first 48 hours were frantic. Police, flyers, search parties, news cameras. The Marcello family had connections even then, enough to make sure the police took it seriously, enough to keep the story in the papers. Not enough to bring Elena home. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The police investigation stalled, then stopped. The detective assigned to the case said what they always said. Most missing children either come home in 72 hours or never come home at all. Eustorgio's mother stopped eating. She'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, staring at Elena's empty chair, waiting for a daughter who would never walk through that door again. She died 2 years later. The doctor called it heart failure, but Eustorgio knew better. You can die from grief just as surely as from any disease. His father lasted another year. The not knowing ate him alive from the inside. Every girl with dark curls became Elena. Every school bell ringing triggered hope that twisted into fresh agony. He started drinking, then stopped coming home, then stopped trying entirely. They found him in the Chicago River. The official report said accidental drowning. Eustorgio knew it was surrender. That's when everything changed. Eustorgio had lost his sister, both parents, and any remaining faith that legitimate systems protected innocent people. So he went looking for information in places ordinary families could never access. He joined the criminal organizations that controlled Chicago streets, not for money or power, but for one thing, knowledge. Took him 3 years to find the truth. Elena had been taken by traffickers who specialized in children, moved through a network that stretched from Chicago to Miami to Mexico City to places where American missing children reports meant nothing. She'd been sold 4 times before her trail went completely cold. By the time Eustorgio learned what happened, Elena would have been 16. Whether she was alive or dead, he would never know. That uncertainty was worse than any confirmed death could have been. He made a promise standing over his father's grave. He would never turn away from a child in danger. Would never let another family experience the destruction that had consumed his own. Would never let money or fear or self-preservation stop him from protecting the vulnerable. That promise had guided every decision he made afterward. It shaped his code, defined his territory, determined which criminal enterprises he would engage in and which he would destroy on sight. Human trafficking operations discovered in his territory simply vanished, their operators found in pieces scattered across the city as warnings. Now Charlene Phillips had walked into his life, bringing with her the ghost of Elena. Same desperate eyes, same courage, same need for protection no one else would provide. And history was trying to repeat itself. Eustorgio closed the drawer, locked it, finished his whiskey in one swallow. He wouldn't let Charlene disappear. Not into Castellanos' network, not into any darkness, even if it cost him everything. Marco arrived at the restaurant at midnight with 2 laptops and a file folder thick enough to be a weapon. He spread everything across Eustorgio's desk without preamble, his face carrying the kind of anger that came from discovering something that made violence feel justified. "Boss, this is bigger than we thought. A lot bigger." Eustorgio closed the door, locked it. "Show me." Marco opened the first laptop, pulling up a network diagram that looked like a spider web. Victor Castellanos isn't just a trafficker. He's built an entire system. It's been operating in Chicago for at least 5 years, maybe longer. He pointed to different nodes on the diagram. Social workers who identify targets. Foster parents who act as temporary holding locations. Family court judges who fast-track adoptions with falsified paperwork. Police officers who make investigations disappear. It's not just 1 or 2 corrupt officials. It's dozens of them, all connected, all protected. Eustorgio studied the diagram, his jaw tightening with each name he recognized. Some of these people had been on the city payroll for decades. Respected, trusted, hidden in plain sight. How does it work? They identify vulnerable children in the system. Orphans, runaways, kids with no family connections who won't be missed. They flag the files, move them through specific foster placements, then fast-track fake adoptions through friendly judges. The children get new identities and are moved out of state or out of country within weeks. By the time anyone questions it, the trail is ice cold. Marco pulled up another document. This is Charlene's case file. It was flagged 3 months ago. He highlighted a note in the margin. No family, no connections, perfect acquisition target. The words hit Eustorgio like a physical blow. They'd marked her, identified her as disposable, as merchandise, as something they could take without consequence. Why hasn't she been taken yet? You. Marco looked up. They've been watching, waiting for you to lose interest. Standard protocol is they observe for 2 to 3 weeks to establish the target's routine, identify vulnerabilities, find the best extraction point. But you've been walking her every morning. You've disrupted her pattern, added an element they weren't expecting. Marco clicked through surveillance photos. Charlene and Eustorgio walking. The black sedan in the background. Rebecca Walsh outside the school. Victor Castellanos in his car, watching. They thought you'd get bored, that this was some temporary good deed. But you haven't stopped. You've actually increased security around her. Tony shadowing the school, your visits to the group home, your questions about her case. You've made them nervous. Good. Boss, there's more. Marco's voice dropped. I found communications between Castellanos and someone inside the police department. They're discussing options for removing obstacles. They're talking about you. Eustorgio leaned back in his chair. Let them talk. They have connections we can't touch. Judges, politicians, federal agents. If they decide you're too much of a problem, they have ways of making you disappear that look completely legitimate. Asset seizure, RICO charges, investigations that tie you up for years while they take the girl anyway. Then we don't give them time to organize. Marco closed the laptops. What are you thinking? Eustorgio stood, walked to the window overlooking the dark Chicago streets. Out there, children like Charlene were being hunted by people who wore badges and carried court orders. Protected by a system that should have been protecting the vulnerable instead. How many children have they taken? Marco's silence stretched too long.
Marco.
How many? Based on flagged files and falsified adoption records we could trace? At least 47 in the past 5 years. That's just what we found. The real number is probably higher. 47 children. 47 Elinas. 47 families destroyed. We're going to dismantle this entire network, Eustorgio said quietly. Every social worker, every foster parent, every judge, every cop. All of them. That's war, boss. War with people who have legitimate authority. Eustorgio turned from the window. Then it's war. The call came at 10:23 a.m. Tony's voice was sharp with urgency. Boss, they're moving. Secretary just pulled Charlene out of class. Says there's a social services appointment. She's walking her toward the parking lot right now. Eustorgio was already moving toward his car. Rebecca Walsh? Black Mercedes? Engine running. Passenger door open. Walsh is in the driver's seat smiling like she's picking up her own kid. Don't let that car leave. I'm 8 minutes out. Boss, if I move on school property without. I don't care. Do not let her take Charlene. Eustorgio drove like the city was burning. Marco and 2 other cars followed, weaving through morning traffic with the kind of reckless precision that came from years of high-speed pursuits. His phone was connected to Tony, who provided updates in real time. There at the car. Charlene's hesitating, not getting in. Walsh is getting out, trying to convince her. What's Charlene doing? Looking around. Looking for you, I think. Eustorgio pressed harder on the accelerator. 6 minutes out. Walsh just grabbed her arm. Charlene's pulling back. Now Walsh is trying to force her into the car. Move. Now. Tony's voice went hard. On it. Eustorgio heard shouting through the phone. then Charlene screaming. Not words, just pure terror. The sound turned his blood to ice. He arrived to chaos. Tony had Rebecca pinned against the Mercedes, one arm twisted behind her back. Charlene stood 10 feet away, crying, held by a teacher who looked like she might faint. School administrators poured out of the building, shouting about police and lawsuits and calling parents. Eustorgio's 3 cars blocked all exits from the parking lot. His men emerged, moving with practiced coordination that made several teachers step backward in fear. Rebecca was screaming, "You're assaulting me. I'm a social worker. I have legal authority." Tony looked at Eustorgio, waiting for orders. "Check her phone." Tony pulled it from Rebecca's pocket, swiping through with his free hand. His expression darkened. He handed the phone to Eustorgio. Text messages. Dozens of them. Conversations with Victor Castellanos coordinating Charlene's pickup, discussing payment schedules, referencing other children by case numbers instead of names. Photographs of Charlene entering and leaving school. Notes about her routine, her vulnerabilities, the obstacle, who walked her each morning. Documentation of everything. The entire operation, preserved in digital evidence because Rebecca Walsh had gotten sloppy and confident. Sirens approached. Multiple units coming fast. The principal rushed over, his face red with panic. "Mr. Marcello, I've called the police. Whatever you think is happening. What's happening is this woman just attempted to kidnap a child using forged documentation. Check her credentials. Call the Department of Children and Family Services. Ask them if Rebecca Walsh is currently employed as a social worker." The principal hesitated, pulled out his own phone, made the call. His face went pale as he listened to the response. 4 police cars screamed into the parking lot. 6 officers emerged, hands on weapons. Eustorgio recognized 3 of them from Marco's investigation. All 3 were on Castellanos' payroll. The lead officer, Detective Hayes, assessed the situation quickly. "Release that woman immediately." Tony didn't move. Hayes' hand moved to his gun. "I said release her. Now." Eustorgio stepped forward, positioning himself between his man and the corrupt cop. "This woman just attempted to abduct a child. We have evidence. Her phone contains text messages documenting a trafficking operation. We'll take the phone as evidence. Release her. So you can make both the phone and the woman disappear?" "I don't think so." Hayes' eyes narrowed. "You're interfering with official police business, Marcello. That's a crime. So is child trafficking, detective. But you'd know that better than I would." The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like hours. School children pressed against windows, watching. Teachers held phones up, recording everything. Parents arrived for pickup, saw armed men and police, and started their own frantic calls. Too many witnesses. Too much exposure. Exactly what Castellanos' network had spent years avoiding. Hayes made his decision. "Everybody stand down. We're taking Ms. Walsh into custody for questioning. Hand over the phone." Eustorgio looked at Rebecca, saw the relief flooding her face. She thought she'd won. Thought her connections would erase this within hours. He made his choice. "Tony, put her in our car." Hayes raised his weapon. "That's kidnapping." "Then arrest me, detective." "But she's not leaving with you." Tony moved before Hayes could react, pulling Rebecca toward the waiting car while Marco stepped between them and the police, his body a wall of muscle and intent. 2 of Eustorgio's other men flanked the movement, creating a corridor that Rebecca disappeared through in seconds. Hayes lunged forward, but Eustorgio caught his arm. "I wouldn't. You just kidnapped a woman in front of 6 police officers and 24 witnesses. I detained a suspected child trafficker. There's a difference." Eustorgio pulled Charlene behind him, keeping his body between her and Hayes. "And if you try to arrest me, my lawyers will have a lot of questions about why you're so eager to protect someone with falsified credentials and connections to Victor Castellanos." The name landed like a grenade. Hayes' face went rigid. "That's right, detective. We know about the network. We know about the judges, the foster parents, the social workers. We know about your monthly deposits from shell companies Castellanos controls. Hayes's hand tightened on his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Too many phones recording. Too many witnesses who would testify about a cop shooting an unarmed man protecting a child. A black town car pulled up, and 3 men in expensive suits emerged. Eustorgio's legal team summoned the moment Tony made the call. The lead attorney, Solomon Weiss, moved with the confidence of someone who'd made careers disappear with well-timed motions. Detective Hayes, I'm Mr. Marcello's attorney. Before you proceed with any arrests, I'd like to present documentation regarding Ms. Rebecca Walsh's employment status. Solomon handed over a folder. Hayes didn't take it. Ms. Walsh's social work credentials were revoked 3 years ago for falsifying adoption records. She has no legal authority to remove children from any institution. Her presence here constitutes attempted kidnapping under Illinois state law. My client and his associate prevented a crime in progress. That's not. Additionally, we have testimony from the Department of Children and Family Services confirming that Ms. Walsh has no official connection to Charlene Phillips's case. We also have phone records documenting Ms. Walsh's communications with known criminal Victor Castellanos, including discussions of payment for child acquisition. Solomon's voice never rose, never wavered. Each word was a nail in Hayes's coffin. Now, detective, you can either take our evidence and begin a legitimate investigation, or you can attempt to arrest my client and face federal charges for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Your choice. The other officers exchanged glances. Not all of them were corrupt. 2 of them looked genuinely confused, like they were realizing they'd walked into something far worse than a simple custody dispute. Hayes lowered his weapon. This isn't over, Marcello.
No, detective.
It's just beginning. While lawyers argued jurisdiction and evidence chains in the parking lot, Rebecca Walsh sat in a windowless room in one of Eustorgio's properties, zip-tied to a chair, staring at Marco's impassive face. You can't do this. I have rights. So did the 47 children your network sold. Marco pulled up a chair, sat backward on it. But we're not here to debate civil liberties. We're here to discuss how you stay alive through tomorrow. Rebecca's bravado cracked. Victor will come for me. Victor will kill you the second he thinks you might talk. In fact, I guess he's making that call right now. Marco checked his phone. Your life expectancy is currently measured in hours. Unless you give me something worth keeping you breathing for. She stared at him, calculating. I want protection. Witness protection, new identity, everything. Talk first. We'll discuss relocation after. Rebecca's shoulders sagged. Then she started talking. Names poured out. Judges who fast-tracked adoptions for cash. Police officers who buried investigations. Foster parents who held children in basements until buyers were arranged. Social workers who flagged vulnerable kids and smoothed paperwork. 5 years of operations, documented in Rebecca's desperate confession. Marco recorded everything, sent it encrypted to Eustorgio, then made one more call. 3 hours later, federal agents arrived at 4 locations simultaneously. Arrests were made. Evidence was seized. A network that had operated in shadows for half a decade began collapsing under its own exposed weight. But Victor Castellanos wasn't at any of the raided locations. He was in a warehouse across the city, loading weapons into a van, making calls to men who specialized in problems that required permanent solutions. If the network was compromised, if Rebecca had talked, if everything was burning, then there was only one play left. Eliminate the witnesses. Eliminate the evidence. Eliminate the mafia boss who'd destroyed everything and the little girl who'd started it all. Make it look like a tragic accident. Gas leak, maybe, or a car crash. Something that would close investigations instead of opening them. Victor Castellanos had survived this long by knowing when to cut losses and start over. Tonight, he'd cut his biggest losses yet. The attack came at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, when Marcelo's restaurant was full of lunch customers finishing their meals. 6 men with automatic weapons burst through the front door, firing into the ceiling, screaming for everyone to get down. But Eustorgio wasn't there. Neither was Charlene. They were 15 floors above the city in Eustorgio's penthouse, surrounded by bulletproof glass and security systems that would make government facilities jealous. Marco had moved them there the moment Rebecca started talking, knowing Castellanos would respond with violence once he realized his network was collapsing. Eustorgio watched the restaurant attack unfold on security monitors, his jaw tight as innocent people dove under tables and his staff scrambled for panic buttons. The attackers were sloppy, desperate, firing wildly instead of with precision. They weren't there to accomplish anything except send a message. This war wouldn't end until someone was dead. Tony's voice came through the radio. Restaurant is secure. Shooters are down. No civilian casualties, but the message is clear. I know what the message is. Eustorgio looked at Charlene, who sat at his kitchen table doing homework, noise-canceling headphones blocking the chaos of the world outside. She'd been through too much already. She deserved peace, safety, childhood. He made 3 phone calls, the first to his lawyers, the second to a judge who owed him favors but wasn't corrupt, the third to Marco. Start the paperwork. I'm adopting her. Silence on the other end. Then, boss, that's public record. Everyone will know. Your enemies, the feds, everyone. You'll be vulnerable. I'm already vulnerable. Have been since the moment I agreed to walk her to school. Eustorgio watched Charlene mouth words as she read, completely absorbed in whatever story had captured her attention. But making it legal means any attack on her is an attack on my family. It means the full protection of everything I've built. It means Castellanos can't touch her without starting a war he won't survive. What about federal protection? You saw the list of corrupt officials. How many of them have federal connections? How many could still reach her in witness protection? Eustorgio shook his head even though Marco couldn't see it.
No.
She's mine now. Officially. The paperwork took 3 days. Emergency custody filing, background checks that his lawyers navigated carefully, home studies that were expedited through judges who understood the urgency even if they didn't know all the details. On Friday morning, Eustorgio Marcelo became a father. Charlene Phillips became Charlene Marcelo. The filing was public record, published in legal notices, accessible to anyone who looked, including Victor Castellanos. The trafficker saw the adoption notice from his lawyer's office, where he'd been hiding since the federal raids began dismantling his network. He stared at Charlene's new name, understanding exactly what Eustorgio had done. The girl wasn't just protected by one dangerous man anymore. She was family. Attacking her meant going to war with an entire criminal organization that controlled half of Chicago. It meant retaliation that would be systematic, brutal, and permanent. Castellanos had survived by knowing when to cut losses. This loss was already cut. He disappeared that night, fleeing to Mexico with whatever money he could liquidate quickly. Some problems weren't worth dying for. 3 months later, Charlene woke up in her bedroom. Not a group homeroom, not a foster placement. Her bedroom, decorated with posters she'd chosen and books she actually wanted to read. She pulled on her pink jacket, grabbed her backpack with its new, unbroken straps, and found Eustorgio waiting by the door. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Can we take the long way today?" "Past the park." "We can take any way you want." They walked through Chicago's streets as the city woke around them. Past the corners where gang members used to call out to her, but now nodded respectfully and looked away. Past the alleys that used to terrify her, but now felt like just another part of the neighborhood. Past the buildings where Eustorgio pointed out details she'd never noticed, teaching her to see the city through eyes that understood both its beauty and its dangers. Charlene didn't need protection anymore. The adoption had made her untouchable in ways that went beyond bodyguards and security systems. She was Eustorgio Marcelo's daughter. That meant something on these streets. But she still asked him to walk her to school most mornings. Not because she was afraid, because these walks had become theirs, a ritual that belonged to them alone. "Dad," Charlene said as they approached the school. Eustorgio still wasn't used to that word. It hit him every time, softening something in his chest that had been hard for so long. "Yeah. Thank you for saying yes that morning, when I asked you to walk me." He knelt down to her eye level, right there on the sidewalk like he had months ago. "Thank you for asking. You saved my life too, you know?" She smiled, hugged him quickly, then ran toward the school entrance where friends waited. She turned back once, waved, then disappeared into the building where children learned about math and reading and all the normal things that had once seemed impossible for a girl like her. Eustorgio stood watching until she was safely inside. His empire continued. His businesses operated. His reputation remained intact. But the man who ran it all had been changed by a 7-year-old girl who'd chosen him when she had no reason to trust anyone. Sometimes the greatest power wasn't fear or violence or control. Sometimes it was simply showing up when someone needed you most. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you believe that real power isn't about control or violence but about risking everything to protect someone who has nothing to offer but trust, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Only those who've never fought for the defenseless won't stand with us.